think this is the closest I've ever actually been to being on time for a live show or anything live like that. David Goss and Casey White with you here for our U.S. Women's National Team semifinal reaction show. Delayed a little bit. Why? Because we had to know what the final would be. You can't come on and talk about the big victory over Germany and say maybe Spain, maybe Brazil. Casey, that's too big a question mark for me. I had to know, and now we do. And I'm not going to lie. We would have done 30 minutes about playing Spain if I had been the one setting the rundown yesterday. So I'm glad we didn't, because what an upset there. What a victory for the U.S. What a day on top with the NWSL Liga MX Semifinal semifinals. It was a big day of soccer. Do you feel good?
I do feel really good. And that's what's so great about the game is, like you said, you can't predict it. And so I'm glad we waited, because now we get to focus in on Brazil and the United States, plus everything else that's kind of going on around the country, around the world in the game. But you're right. It was a big upset in a lot of ways, and I'm excited about the matchup.
I am excited as well. I am a little bummed. I wanted Emma Hayes in the U.S. against Spain in the World Cup champions and the style and all of that. But a gold medal game is a gold medal game. The narratives are off the charts. We will get into all of that as we go along. And as I said, we will recap the semifinals that we saw moving forward. The final for the Summer Cup is coming up in October. So a long break till that, but the last chance for these teams in that competition to sort of get out on the field before the reinforcements come back. And all of a sudden, what now will be a lot of Olympic medalists heading back to the United States to play in NWSL action. Casey, let's start with the U.S. women's game against Germany. It ends up being a extra time 1-0 win. We'll dig into the tactics. We'll dig into some of it. But big picture, like, what is that? What does this moment mean? What does it mean that this group, no matter what, has won a semifinal, is headed to a final, has won a medal, whether it's silver or gold? Like, what does this moment mean in this team?
It has to feel really good for this group. And just with the adversity of not doing as well in the World Cup, this is a group that we're not adverse to not feeling pressure. There's always pressure on the United States. But when you have the showing that they had and the expectation that comes with being a part of the women's national team for the U.S., it's really difficult when you have that kind of showing. And they're really high, but then to come back, be able to get to a gold medal game, they're not going to settle for that, don't get me wrong, but I think that's really great to see that just a year later, there can be that big of a difference, and that they were able to not only improve some things in their game, but to execute and turn that into wins.
And it hasn't been easy. I think that is a big part of it. You talk about that adversity. It hasn't been easy in the game against Germany. It wasn't easy in the game against Japan. It hasn't been easy over the last year, dealing with the fallout of the World Cup, getting a new coach, having an interim in between, then working under a new coach, having a lot of different players come into the group, try and find their feet. You look for individuals and you talk the obvious one, Mel Swanson returning from injury and finding her feet and all of that. It hasn't been easy. And I think that is what's really heartening about watching this group, is their ability to stick together and overcome, both in these matches and then as a program overall, at a time when we weren't sure what the future was, because the past was so solidified. You had these characters in the past that guaranteed you that you were going to perform at a certain level. You were going to see a certain style of fight and all of those things. And it's been a long talking point of like what the next generation is. I think no matter what happens on Saturday, they've proven that they can carry things to the future. And if you are any other player coming into this group in the future, you know you can look to a Naomi Girma. You can look to Sophia Smith when the pressure's against you and say, I know that they can help us get there. And as long as I do my job, we're going to be okay.
Right, and they're even more battle tested now. And I like the fact that there's been some adversity, big picture, but also adversity throughout each of these games. An article just came out where Emma Hayes said, I want my players to suffer. Like, I want them to go through these things, because she gets it. She knows that to win at the highest level, you aren't going to go through unscathed. There's going to be moments where you have to understand it's not going to be easy. You're going to suffer through some things, but how do you figure out to have those tiny little margins that really separate you? And the United States has been able to do that so far. They have one more game to prove they can do it, to win at the highest level again and get the gold medal. But there's been a lot throughout this tournament that they've had to deal with. Some's gone rather easy, and other things they've had to have patience and really wait for the moment for it to pay off.
It is clearly a successful first trip for Emma Hayes as coach of the U.S. women's national team, at a minimum, winning a silver medal. I find that one of the most interesting parts of team sports at the Olympics is when you win the semifinal, you've guaranteed yourself a medal, but you still have to play the biggest game either of the year or of your life. What do you make of that dichotomy and sort of the experience for these players?
Well, I can guarantee you that every player right now will see silver as not successful.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's where they're at. That's where their heads are at. I was just talking recently with Christine Lilly, and she was even still talking about losing to Norway in 1996 and how difficult that was for her. And obviously, two-time World Cup champion, two-time Olympic gold medalist, like, she rebounded quite well. But it's still impacted her. And so none of these players are thinking that that's going to be successful. Okay, maybe long term, maybe, but right now it's all gold. We go for that or bust.
Yeah, I think that's why all of you play at that high level, and I'm at home being like, silver medal is awesome. What an impressive thing to do.
I kind of see that, though, a little bit. Like, I'm getting older now, and I'm like, hey, like, from the outside looking in, that's great.
It's pretty,
from the inside looking out, not great, right? No. You want, as that competitor, to bring home the gold.
And it is legacy stuff for a lot of people. When you go back and you think about, you know, now it's been 12 years since London 2012, and you think about for Alex Morgan arriving on the scene, and for so many players in that group, the revenge from 2011 in the Women's World Cup final in Japan and all of that, and all the moments since then. And, of course, the final in 2015 and what it's meant for Carly Lloyd's life, and the final in 2019 and Megan Rapinoe and all of that. Mm-hmm. These are the moments that will stick for players forever. And it's a lot of young players. They'll be around for a while, but this is a huge opportunity and a big moment, and it's coming up against Brazil, and Brazil has their own moment coming because Marta will return after the 2-game suspension. She could be a part of this game if they want to. They have the option, but we will talk about whether or not they will going forward. Let's dig into the Germany game because it was the second matchup in a short tournament. You play the same team twice. It's bizarre the way the bracket was set up. Both of the semifinals were rematches of a group stage game, and the U.S., the win against Germany in the group stage was, I thought, their best performance up until the semifinal. So you're feeling pretty good. Then the news comes out right before the game that Pop goes down with a sickness. She's going to be unavailable. That's your best player for Germany. They're already down Oberdorf. Then their leading scorer as well is named out right before the starting lineup comes out. And then on the flip side, Tierna Davidson and Sam Coffey are back in the team, and the U.S. gets their best 11 going into it. What did you see in this game, and what did you see in this game similar or different from the first matchup?
Well, it really did see, like, to all your points, that the momentum, even before the kickoff, was going our way, was going towards the United States, just with those players out, our players back in that had been starting. So that's one thing. But the game still had to be played. One of the things that I felt was really different about what Germany did, or they were at least more effective with, was they tried to deny balls into Sam Coffey. They weren't letting as many balls get into her feet. And you could tell it was obvious the way they defended in the 4-4-2, the way they rotated and kind of doubled up on her. They wanted to make the center backs play make. So that was one thing that I thought was different. But from Coffey's perspective, she distracted and took 2 players a lot of times. So her movement was really good. It cleared space for other people. So we just had to adapt in that moment. From a defensive perspective, I didn't feel like they were much higher than what they were the first game. I didn't feel we were quite as technically sharp in some of our movements. And like you said, we just exposed them really well in that first game. But Hegering had a heck of a performance for that first 60, 70, 80. I can't remember the minute she got subbed out when she went down.
Yeah.
But I mean, she was coifing people in the penalty box, in her own penalty box. I'm like, what is happening? But I respect it. But she was playing really well 1v1 defensively. So there were some individual performances, I think, for Germany that stepped up as well, made it a little bit harder. And you mentioned Pop and Schuler being out. Obviously, those are big losses. Pop being a captain as well. Just having that really affects your emotions when she's not on the field.
And we thought that they would use Pop to put more pressure on the center backs specifically. Maybe that drops the U.S. line at times a little bit more, maybe cause a little bit more chaos for a listener of when to come off my line, when not to. A lot of that went away with the 4 substitutions, but it did feel like a faster German team across the board and the ability to press a little bit more in more areas rather than just have one idea, because you could recover, and it felt like multiple players across the front 6 were comfortable swapping in and out of some of those positions. So it created some different looks for the US, and I felt after the first half, it felt like a final to me, which was more 2 teams that didn't want to lose than 2 teams that wanted to win. And I think some of that is fair. And for Germany trying to find their feet without these big players and find their feet against a favorite. And I think for the US's side, in some of the games we've seen so far, we've talked about create overloads, throw stuff against the wall because you know you can recover. Let's create goals, where this German team is more dangerous and you didn't want to make that mistake. And it kind of felt like 45 minutes in, it was poised where we think we know where it's going, but not 100% sure.
I think that's all really good points. It was the first game that I really felt was equal at the start. Like, both teams were going to go after it. There were going to be chances on both ends. None of the games, even playing Germany the first time, did I really feel threatened. And at times I thought, okay, if this breaks down, this might not be so good, right? So to your point, it felt like a proper game and a proper matchup, which I really like to see. It was exciting as a fan of the team to watch that. I also think there were 2 distinct things that Germany did on the attacking side that were a little bit different than the first game. They pushed their 10 up on the forward line. So at times there was 4 against our back 4. So Coffee was having to stay really close to the back line. That can create a lot of havoc for the back line. We dealt with it quite well, but that was a tactical change and maybe a personnel change from just playing a little bit differently. The other piece was Berger came up at times. She was 30 yards out when they had the ball and build up in the middle part of the field. And so creating a 3v2 versus our front 2 when we were in our defensive block, that was different. Berger, we didn't see doing that a lot in the first game. We did hold even more possession in that game. It felt like, at least. But with Berger, I think that kind of helped them and allowed the 10 to then push on even higher up the field and get a more advanced position.
Berger, I thought, made that attempt, and obviously part of it game planning, to just be as involved as possible, almost like we are missing all these pieces. How can I affect the game as a goalkeeper? As much she was aggressive off her line on a few balls over the top, it comes back to haunt her a little on the goal, but she made some big plays in which there is space for Swanson and Smith and Rodman to run into. Can you make life just a quarter of a percentage easier for your back line to not have to chase some of the best players in the world over the top over and over and over again? And then I felt like for large stretches, though, for this U.S. team, it looked a little more comfortable in the first half with Davidson in there because she is a little more confident stepping into midfield in possession or hitting that switch. Then she comes off at halftime and Sonnet comes back in. What do you make of the decision to start Davidson, whether it was with a 45-minute limit, which we don't know yet, or if it was how much, let's see how much you can give us, and then change at that position specifically at center back?
As a coaching staff, when you're thinking about minute restrictions, let's pretend there wasn't a minute restriction, but you just were unsure how long Tierna could last. You want to start that player normally, because what you don't want to do is have a double sub situation where Sonnet starts, you bring Tierna Davidson in at half, and then she can only go 20 minutes. So then you're having to do it again. So if you want to make sure there's not too much risk involved, you can do that. They obviously had to think that Tierna could give good minutes, and she did. and she did give good minutes. So there may have been a minutes restriction on that, and hey, we're going to make this substitution at halftime. I didn't see a whole lot tactically that warranted the substitution, so I do lean
Right.
towards that, but we're never going to probably fully know exactly what happened there. But I think you give her confidence back, you get that unit between her and Germa back clicking again, but you also allow Sonnet to come into a game who played more minutes and keep that going, because who knows how Davidson's going to feel after that 45 minutes going into the next game. So there's a lot of player management strategies that I think were at play in that decision making.
Yeah, I tend to agree in that. One, I think if Davidson's available to some extent, you play her based off what you've seen over the last few games of like how big of a difference maker she was. And what I thought was really big in that first half was it also frees Dunn up a little more. Sonnet can do the same work defensively, does a lot of the same work defensively. It's more in possession where I think Dunn feels she has to be an option on the sideline to always be there, where there were moments in the first half where you saw Dunn rotate inside. You saw her get higher, but in the channel a little bit more rather than out wide. It just gave you a little bit more variance. Plus, there was only one time you saw the big switch from Davidson to Rodman, which I thought was a really dangerous moment. Rodman plays it inside first time rather than taking it down and attacking, but that is an element that Davidson gives you. You didn't get the goal for it, but I understand trying it. And like you said, you would start that and then make the sub. It is odd to sub center backs. It doesn't happen all the time. That doesn't mean it's bad or wrong. And like you are going to a veteran in Emily Sonnet who has been there a million times before. She's played multiple positions in the same game. Like she can figure that out and get, I think, up to speed. And that's what we saw as the game went along. Then in that second half, it starts to wear on and the chances are not really coming. And then you get the change of Rose Lavelle for Lynn Williams, which I don't know was one that we all had on our bingo card exactly. What did you make of that decision in that moment and how it affected the team?
I wondered who was coming out. I was like,
Right.
Mallory's not coming out, right? Like I
Right.
was like, what's happening here? And I think it made sense. What I really liked, we know that Mallory Swanson can play in that somewhat hybrid 10-9 role. She does it for the Chicago Red Stars at times, comes into that space. And what I liked about it was that Mallory Swanson, even playing off the left side, will float into that area. But what happens is Rose Lavelle or another 10, Haran coming up, is already occupying that space. Swanson operates well with more space. Yes, she's very tidy in possession, but she's at her best when she's running off the dribble. I feel like she's faster than most people off the dribble than people that are just running. So what that did, it cleared space for her to be able to get the ball face forward and run at people. And so we didn't see a lot, I felt, from Lynn Williams besides, I mean, obviously the defensive effort from Lynn Williams was great. Not a lot dangerous going into the attack, but the actual tactical and personnel switch I thought was good because it brought Mallory Swanson more into the game. She was more impactful the further and further on the game went.
Yeah, I in my notes I have written 5 separate times because I forgot I wrote it. Mallory Swanson way more energetic, way more involved since Roosevelt came off. That is not a knock to Roosevelt, as you said. It just gave more responsibility, more space for Swanson to find the game. And when they made the move, I was a little confused because Swanson had struggled, and so it's like you're going from she hasn't played super well, she hasn't been really involved, to now putting more responsibility on her shoulders, and it worked out perfectly. And I think with Lynn Williams, the threat of her ability to score, the threat of her ability to stretch the field, even if she doesn't touch the ball, creates space and is a factor on the field, and it's something that the other team has to account for. And I think Emma Hayes and her staff knew that in putting her out there. Plus, you talk about the work rate and everything you're going to get off the ball, which is going to help keep you condensed and help, I think, Sophia Smith and Mal Swanson save a little bit of energy if they wanted to, which it doesn't seem like they do. Like, Swanson chased a dead ball down to the corner in like the 95th minute. That was she was never going to get there. And she was like, I'm going to make an effort here. And you love to see that. And it's great. And it's why I think she's a really special part of this team. But it was really fun to see her play in that role and see her attack space and see her be able to come to the ball in movement so that she doesn't already have a set defender next to her and all of those things. I thought some of the decision making was a little tough. And then when she finally picked it up in those spots, the big one was when she drove down the middle and tried to play Sophia Smith early into feet rather than either picking up a defender or playing wide for Rodman to crash back into the two attackers. But you could see the ideas coming. You could see that space coming. And to me, it feels like with this group, and everyone talks about it in a different way, and I don't think people are wrong, Some people are like, they're so reliant on the front three. Some people are saying the front three of the whole team. Whatever it is, I think there's a belief that this group will figure it out on the field. And so there are tactical adjustments, there are shifts, but I think the core essence is let's give this group as much time as possible for them to finally solve these problems. And so far, the case is that they will at some point.
And one thing I think we all have to remember is every player on that team, on the field, off field, has a job, has a role. And look, if you're scoring goals, we're going to talk about goal scorers. It's just how it is. It's how the game is. I mean, look at all the players that have played throughout, history on the men's side, the women's side. Like, we're talking about mostly
Every legend.
goal scorers, right? Yeah. Like, it's just how it is. But everyone has their role. And I think that you're right. Like, there was a lot of personnel that stepped up and just allowed them to do their thing, like Mallory Swanson finding Sophia Smith. But I also think Emma Hayes was holding on to that Mal Swanson to the middle in her movement in her back pocket. We haven't seen that the entire tournament. I was like, where did this come from? And it was, I thought, brilliant. And what also happened quite quickly after, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on timing, but then Haran came out and we went into a double pivot, so if you've got Lynn Williams and Rodman looking to run in behind, that makes defenders take 5-10 yards back, which creates space. You've got a double pivot and not really either one of them rotating into the 10 space, which gives more space. Well, Mallory Swanson, brilliant in space off the dribble. So that entire move made complete sense to open up that space for her. Forget about the defensive reason it made sense too when Albert went in. But all of it, I think, just created a lot more space in midfield that I don't believe Germany was ready for.
Yeah, you could feel the game open up as the second half wore along. Part of that is exhaustion, which we've heard both teams talk about, of just the condensed schedule, the condensed set of rosters, the movement, around to the different cities, all of that, which was always bound to happen, which I think is to the US's advantage. I think in space 1v1 on both sides of the ball, they are a better team than probably any other team at this tournament. Naomi Girma proceeded to prove that like 1,000 times over the course of the end of the game. And as that game opened up, and then, as you said, Emma Hayes did everything she could to create even more space in that. So the Lynn Williams move was in the 60th. That was like the big second half sub. And then Haran and Dunn come off to start extra time. So it was about the half hour of that second half. Then they come off to start extra time. You put Albert, as you said, in that defensive spot. Niswanger goes in at left back. I think a lot of that was energy because there wasn't a ton where you look at it and say, this is a game for Niswanger, and that it's not like there was numbers in the box for her to put crosses into, but she'll cover a ton of ground up and down that sideline, and she'll sort of open up, I think, a little more space to pull some pressure away from Sonnet when you play out through her on that left side. And I thought it worked out very well for the U.S., of course. And then they get the goal. And like, that is the big moment. And it is, as I said, problem solving from these two players. For Swanson, again, driving down the middle. How do I make a difference? How do I make a play? And Sophia Smith understanding. I think Berger spacing is the biggest part of that, because it's not a first time shot if the keeper's on her line. But she recognized what was going on. And I think I was listening, I think it was Danielle Slayton talking about it, saying when a goalkeeper is coming on an attacking player, you just want to shoot before they're set. And she's able to get that shot off sliding quickly before Berger is set. And you see Berger's hand go up the moment it goes past her, sort of saying like, that's on me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There was a lot of really high level things about that goal, including the pass in behind, the way it was played. But I'm going to say something. I think Sophia Smith made the pass look even better because she was on the left side of Feli Rausch. And then she kind of whipped over to the right side, just that little bit of movement to get, I'm on your left, now I'm on your right. And I don't think she knew how to deal with her. Then leaving her feet with the recognition of Berger coming out. Danielle Slayton's absolutely right. It's when they're not set, when they're running towards you, that's what you want to use. You want to keep it low. You want to use their momentum against them. Smith did so many good things. It was such a goal scorer's goal where it looked so instinctual from her. And that's what, when you train it and you do it over and over and over and have a nose for goal, it just comes out in big moments. And I love that she was rewarded in that moment, because that just looks like the training ground to me of things you've had to do to figure out how to get a goal, to get out of 5v5 and get going so I don't have to do fitness. That's what that looked like to me. But that's the brilliance behind it, because it's so incredibly hard what she did. Like, all of that together in one moment is so incredibly hard to pull off. And so I just have a lot of respect for that goal.
And to have the mental state 97 minutes in to this semifinal after 2 weeks of play, like it is the hardest time of the tournament for her at that moment. And so to have the mental state to like read the play, like I said, and you mentioned what she does with the pass, running down things where in theory, once that pass goes past them, she shouldn't win that ball. So like she's running down in theory a dead ball option that she's just trying to keep the play alive, and then the recognition. And she didn't want to do fitness, so she just collapsed on the floor for the celebration.
That was like a little
that.
bit of my memory coming back to me, right? Like I obviously lost some 5v5 games for fitness, but I should have left my feet.
No, if you score and then lay down, they can't make you do fitness because you can't run at that point. And on the goal, I do have to shout. It starts with the clearance from Germany. Emily Fox bumps the attacking player perfectly. It runs through to Germa. Germa breaks lines to Coffey's feet, and Coffey goes upfield. I thought you mentioned Coffey and sort of playing as a decoy and what she did. She did that very well. When they did play into her feet, she was very conservative to play east and west. This is a moment where she played north-south, and it's the moment that breaks through. And so you sort of lull a team to sleep over the course of a game, expecting what they should from you, and then you have the recognition to break that as well. So I wanted to shout out her play on that play and across the game in general.
Yeah, you're exactly right, though. When Coffey made any passes in the game, I remember them. Like, that was what was really nice about her game. A lot of it was changing the point, but they were purposeful. They weren't backwards just to keep possession. I mean, yes, she had some of those, but they were those diagonals into feet of the wingers. Like you said, finding this pass forward to set up the goal. She was just very intentional about the way she played and made the most of those opportunities.
She was the huge ad. And, of course, her sitting out the last game, really unfortunate, but also meant she had more minutes probably in her legs. You mentioned the changes with Haran and Dunn and sort of tactically. Let's talk about emotionally, though, because this is a young group. This is an untested group. The ones that have been there before are your captain in Lindsay Haran, Crystal Dunn, who has been in finals and has won championships, and Rose Lavelle. Emma Hayes taking them off the field, and like the soccer comes first. But it's a big moment for this team to say, like, I have belief in these other players that they can get it done. And I was really encouraged in watching the breaks in between extra time with Lindsay Horan sort of going around the circle, talking to players and getting in their heads and getting in their faces, still being engaged. But it's a really big moment, I think, for the future of this team, that those are the moves Emma Hayes chose to make and the trust that she showed in the rest of the group.
Well, I think getting one thing straight, it was gutsy. It's gutsy to make those moves in those moments, because you can sit there and watch it and go, oh, this should happen. But to actually be on a sideline with those kind of stakes and make those moves, you don't know if they're going to pay off. And guess what? Even if it's the right move, it may not pay off.
Right.
I mean, that's coaching and that's sports. And that's really incredibly gutsy of Emma in that moment. But it made sense. It made sense for a lot of reasons. Haran was having trouble covering the ground because she does like to float forward, but there were a lot of spaces in midfield that Germany was getting into. And when their 10s playing as high as they are, you can't just leave Coffey there. And then on the ball as well, she just wasn't getting on it. And so it was like, okay, let's go to a double pivot. It gives us a little bit of solidity in the midfield. Also, Albert and Coffey, really simple in possession. Get it, move it, and allow space for Mallory Swanson. I think there were a lot of different tactical reasons that paid off. But you're right. Really interesting to take out just the experience. Because really, you had Crystal Dunn left and Alyssa Nair, right? Those were the most experienced players, obviously, that were out there. But, there were a lot that was left on the bench or taken off. So that can be a little bit interesting, but it speaks to how much our younger players have grown. And it's hard to get younger players, and especially younger forwards, to be okay with that they haven't scored or they haven't figured that out, and just to stay patient and stay the course. And so there was a lot of maturity shown in those moments.
A lot of the youth and technical directors and whatever that I work around, their line is always, if you're good enough, you're old enough, and you never know until you put them in the spot. And I think that's sort of part of the risk the U.S. took in this moment. And now they can say that they're proven and they're there. And I go back to the 2012 game and say, like, the stretch over the next 7 to 8 years, a lot of the players were sort of steeled in the 08, 2012 games in which it was on their shoulders to figure it out. And I think now you've got that confidence in this group going forward. It was a big day for Emma Hayes. Afterwards, when asked if she wanted Spain, she said she wanted a drink. So she's been through it. It has been a quick start for her out the gates with the send-off games into the Olympics, and they are headed to the Olympic final, and they will play against Brazil. They will not play against Spain. After Brazil upset Spain 4-2, was the final in this one, a rematch of a group stage game. The group stage game was the one where Marta got the red card, so she was red carded in like the 45th minute. Brazil actually held on for a really long time and stayed in that game before Spain finally broke through. Brazil get out of the group on the goal differential on the last moment, basically preying on what could happen and what ended up happening. And they end up sneaking in over Australia on that goal difference. And then they get back to this point. No Marta still suspended. And Brazil come out the gates and they take the game from Spain really, really quickly. Talk to me about what you saw from this Brazil group and sort of what led to this victory.
You only get to have the element of surprise once, right? And if you don't do it at the beginning of the game, you might be able to do it at the beginning of the second half. But Brazil went right from the beginning. I don't think anybody, talking about bingo cards, I don't think anybody had it on theirs that Brazil was going to press as high as they did, because it was incredibly risky. So to do that against the reigning world champions, not many people expected that, and Spain certainly didn't. And so there was no answer for it. And the problem is, yes, they're great players, but in game, it's really hard to make that adjustment when there's an emotional piece to it of how they're pressing and they're getting confidence, plus they're rewarded with an early goal, an own goal, but an early goal. Then everything starts to seem to unravel. So you kind of have to like hope for halftime, unfortunately. I mean, even the best players in the world, because there is a piece of momentum that's really hard to slow down. But credit to Brazil, they could have scored more, which is amazing to say. They just created havoc. And I just don't think Spain ever figured out where are the spaces that Brazil's leaving and how do we expose that. Yeah, they eventually got some more possession and showed their quality, but it was never in a way that caught Brazil off guard. It was like Brazil was expecting that. We're going to give them the ball some. They're going to create opportunities. We've just got to score more goals. Like, we've got to risk to get the reward, and they did that.
Yeah, there was one moment where Spain played through Brazil centrally and had a runner coming from out wide. I think it was Hermoso. And, like, that's the moment you're looking for is once we beat the line of pressure, can we get out quickly? Can we get in transition? As great as this Spain team is, that isn't where they want to be. So then you get that half moment of like, well, this isn't comfortable for us. We don't want to get out and open the game. So we're going to sort of recycle possession and play. It allows Brazil to recover. It allows Brazil to reset their lines. And then you have to play from there, trying to break them down with the threat of these Brazilian players in transition. The surprise was, it was awesome for all of us, I think, of like, okay, the U.S. wins, you settle in, Spain's going to win, it's going to be this final, we have all these narratives, all these ideas, and then 8 minutes in, you're like, oh, okay, Brazil score, and then they stuck to that for another 20 minutes, and it's like, wow, this is really a completely different game than what I expected to see. And I think we talked about gutsy on Emma Hayes' side and the U.S. side. It is gutsy to throw that against the wall in a semifinal against Spain for a Brazil team that like had underperformed. And there are question marks about Elias's job coming into this tournament and the question marks about this program. And you reset things by playing this bold move here in this opening of the biggest game of the year.
And just speaking for myself in this moment, I don't think I ever expected Brazil to play in a low block, just to be clear. That's not their game, right? And yes, they have really good ability to possess, but what I liked is that, one, they did definitely press higher than I expected, but they had just runners going and the energy level was really big. Spain just didn't adapt. And I think that as much as they could have, where they needed to get maybe a little bit more out of their comfort zone and play a little bit more direct at times and things like that to unsettle Brazil. And it just didn't. Look, they still got 2 goals, but it just didn't happen a whole lot. But I never expected Brazil to fully sit back. But at the same time, like, it was pretty crazy just how quickly they went, and they never seemed to slow down. Yeah. Like, the midfield covered a lot of space. The back line, it was like they knew there was going to be risk and they were just going to have to end plays and not mess around with it. They just seemed to really execute the game plan for their head coach.
There was, a lot of big performances in this one for this Brazilian team. Angelina was fantastic in central midfield. The setup of the back three for Brazil is really impressive in that they kind of are always equal defenders at that point. So the wingbacks can chase and attack a little more, and there's some more freedom of where we press and when we want to press rather than requirements of I have to step here to try and stop, this team getting into our attacking zone. And it feels like a lot of that opened things up for Brazil. And on the opening goal, it is an own goal, but Priscilla's the one pressing, and it takes a deflection off of her into the Spanish defender. I can't remember who it was now, into the goal. And like that pressure causes the goal, and it is hopeless. You are pressing a goalkeeper. You're pressing one of the elite possession goalkeepers in the world. You're pressing Spain sort of on your own in that exact moment, but it gets you that. And when I said it with the US, chasing down dead balls in situations that probably won't serve well for you, but you're putting out the energy. That was the case for Brazil in this one. And then from there, you start to see the talent come off the bench and Caroline and all of that. And it's like they are not at 100% right now. They're missing. So they had all 4 alternates on the game day roster in this one. They're missing veterans. They're missing Marta suspended. They've got players like Caroline in here who are coming off injury or haven't played in a year. And they only, it felt like, got better as the game went along until the final tactics free 10 minutes of like Spain starts to throw everything forward and it becomes a little chaotic.
You're right, and that's what's so scary about this Brazil team is the belief now,
Yeah.
right? They've had belief, but I'm sure when Marta went out, yes, it might have galvanized them from an emotional perspective, like let's get her another game, but like they did finally, and it could have been a bronze game or a gold game, and eventually they start when they get a result like this, you start to go, well, we can go win this thing. And that's something that is really scary for the United States to come up against because they have been backs against the wall, figured it out, not had their whole roster. When you're bringing Adriana and Caroline off the bench, that's scary.
That's wild.
They have so much pace to penetrate in behind. They're great off the dribble. And you mentioned Angelina as well. She's really had a resurgence in the last year, playing for the Orlando Pride. So good in possession, breaks up play really well. And I agree with you. I think she had a really great performance in midfield.
It is, when you talk about those subs, it sounds very US of like, oh, we'll bring in ex NWSL All-Star off the bench just for extra legs, right? We'll bring in the all-time leading scorer in NWSL history and Lynn Williams off the bench just to like add a little bit more energy. That's what it feels like with this Brazil group. They played a super young team out the gate, so you have more energy. You can run. I think there was some blind confidence in there, which is awesome, which is exactly what you want to see. And then you've got those veterans that are slowly finding their way back into this group coming off the bench as well. So now they believe that they can go and win this. How does it happen? Let's talk about Saturday. So Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern time, it is the gold medal match in Paris. I believe it's at the Parc des Princes, where the U.S. has already played one game in the knockouts. This is the big moment for the U.S. We talked about it a little bit before we came on, but as an Olympic team, now you get to go to the host city. You get to be around the Olympic Village if the team chooses to stay there. If not, you get to still go and visit. You get to go watch some of the other events. Like, this is the Olympic experience part for a lot of these players. And you've got a gold medal on the line. Talk about the experience and sort of what you expect the next few days look like, and then what this game matches up as.
It's the perfect time to experience that. You've gotten yourself to the gold medal game. Take it in, right? Like, it is something special. It is something different. And you can use that from an emotional perspective just to push you onward. Add it as another layer on top. Yes, business as usual. Yes, when it gets to game day, all that kind of goes out the window. But you should soak that in. I mean, this is incredibly special to be around all these athletes. So I don't think that will hinder the United States. I think it can only help them being in that type of situation. From a matchup standpoint, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what Brazil does. There's probably 2 trains of thought here, and I think most people listening or most people that are following could go either way. One is it worked against Spain. Why not ride that and see how it is against the United States? And then there's another train of thought where the United States plays differently than Spain. And I believe that if Brazil comes out like they did against Spain, they will make us uncomfortable. Like, playing out of the back, we'll have to find some more times to be direct, and we're going to be smarter in the back with how we play out. And so they could make us uncomfortable. I hope they don't steal a goal or two, but it could happen. However, we have a lot more personnel to penetrate behind their back line.
Yeah.
And that's something Spain didn't do. They couldn't really ever figure out how to get into a counter-attacking position and find the spaces that were left, because there were some huge gaps that they could have exposed versus Brazil in transition. The United States is very good at that. We just haven't had to do it a lot in this tournament. But you've got the players up top to expose that. So if Brazil is going to do that, there might be some reward, but I think it could be a high-scoring game if they go that route, because there'd be a lot of reward on the flip side for the United States as well.
It's what the U.S. has been begging for. They haven't had chances to do it because that's the thing everyone wants to stop them from doing.
Right.
Sophia Smith, Trinity Rodman, and Mel Swanson might be the 3 best transition players in the world. They're on the same team. They want to run at players. They want to run into space. They're all finishers. They're all creators as well. And the U.S. is okay to bypass midfield. Where Spain, it's not in their DNA. They don't want to. They lose the game. They lose control. For the U.S., if you're going to press numbers up, great. We're going to play into the space, whether it's a knockoff and a lay down of Smith comes back, lays off for Swanson to run forward, or it's just directly a ball that they can run onto themselves. And we've seen how good Sophia Smith is coming out of the central area into that left channel where Swanson then crosses underneath her. And that is all direct play. When that ball's played up that left channel, she then is able to pick it up. She goes 1v1. She can create for others. She can create for herself. All of that is dream scenario for the U.S., which is why I agree with you that I don't think we'll see it from Brazil. We won't see it in the same way. Correct. The other question mark out there for Brazil is, how do you bring Marta back into this team? She is a legend. She is a huge part of this group. She's still a great player. We've seen her resurgence over the last year plus with the way Orlando's played, with the way Brazil's played. How do you handle a legend like that in sort of a moment like that?
Well, I think she'll play whatever role is asked of her. She wants a gold medal, so if she's bought into that, she'll do it. I don't see how you don't start her. I really don't, because she was a starter coming into the Olympics. It's not like you're just it's a handout. You know, this is Marta, and if she had come into the Olympics in a reserve role, I would say, okay, I don't know what you do here, right? But she came in and has been starting and playing, but had the red card. So to me, if you're going to put your entire top team out there, if they're medically good to go, if they've got the minutes and the legs on them and everything, Marta's in that. That's what you said from the very beginning of the Olympics. So I'd be surprised if she's not in there. That does change a little bit of the way they play. I think you get more possession with Marta in there, but maybe not as much pressing from the midfield underneath the forwards. So maybe a bit more strategic in the way they press is something the United States should expect. But we didn't talk about her, but I want to point out Ludmila as well on the right side for Brazil. I think that's going to be a matchup we have to watch. She was very effective against Spain, and that's been the kind of the side that we have to be careful on, not because Crystal Dunn has been bad. She just commits forward to the attack. So in counter-attacking transition moments for the opposition, I think that area is going to be something that Sonnet or Davidson, who's ever playing, is going to have to be really aware of. Or if we have a strong side midfielder kind of protecting that space, that'll be important.
And I think that's what you saw against Germany, because the expectation was that that's where Germany would try and attack. I think Coffey and Horan sort of aware of that, shading over there. And then what we saw in the Japan game was the change was to bring Neiswanger on as a midfielder and slide her in front of that area just to bring that extra support. Ludmila has been really good. I've been watching her because she is headed to Chicago Red Stars. So I've been trying to see like what type of player are you getting? And I thought in the Spain game, you saw a high level of she can create 1v1. She likes the ball at her feet, but she understands how to create for her teammates. We saw a couple really early crosses around the back line where she's like, I think the defender puts their head down thinking she's going to try and take me down the sideline, and she quickly plays into space. I think a really exciting pickup for Chicago. And I think, as you said, an X factor in this game is winning those sidelines and winning those spots in which the U.S. has great talent, but hasn't really, over the course of this competition, been the dominant team. Emily Fox has been really solid, hasn't been a game changer. It's not really her role. And then Dunn, as she has sort of gone along things, I think has had to help so much inside as well as deal with her own stuff, defending and the amount of attack coming at her. She hasn't been a match winner for the U.S. going up that left wing. And so could that be an option for the U.S.? Could they find spaces? Because with the wingbacks out there, the space technically is centrally for the U.S., right? The U.S. should have the numbers advantage in central midfield. How do you sort of, as a U.S. team, if you're looking at a group that does come out in this 3-5-2 or whatever you want to call it. 3-4-3 is what more of what we saw against Spain. How do you as the US take advantage of those gaps?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is going to be Sophia Smith or Mallory Swanson creating that overload centrally. One of them looking to penetrate in behind with the run that makes the center backs respect that, drop off, and the other one coming in. So their connectivity and the way they make runs, just more of that. They've done it in the Olympics, but you create that 4 against, it can be 2 at times in midfield, like you said, if it's a 3-4-3, or it can be 3 in midfield. So you create that numbers up situation. And if Sam Coffey can get turned and play those balls that break lines into the feet of either Smith or Swanson, I think that would be really good for us. But you never know. Brazil might try to shut that down and force us wide and make our outside backs get forward. I don't know exactly how they'll approach that. I'm kind of expecting anything at this point after what we saw for Spain, which I think is exciting. But the United States needs to keep playing the way they are. I don't think there's big tactical changes or sweeping changes that need to be had. They just have to be able to adjust and be able to adjust to things they see within the game. And I'm sure they'll be prepared to do that.
When you talk about X factors in this one, I think of Rose Lavelle in those gaps. If she can float in and find the ball and maybe use the numbers of whether Swanson comes inside or more likely Haran and Coffey stepping into those areas, where if it is a 3v2 advantage and she can pick it up, then she can play make. And sometimes that's driving at the back line. Sometimes that's playing an early slip ball for a Rodman or a Smith or whatever, making runs off her. And what we've seen now, I mean, we've seen it always, but now that she's gotten healthy again, is sometimes it's scoring goals from distance as well. She hasn't done it a ton because the game states haven't been there in this tournament with teams sitting so deep, but this is a different matchup in a different moment. As you have said, like, Brazil is going to come out to win this game. They are not going to sit as deep as we have seen a Japan do earlier in these knockouts. And I think there's space for a player like that. They've managed Lavelle with her energy and with her minutes and with the injuries and all of that. But you've managed her to this point for this moment. Like what you did with Davidson to put her out there and say, like, go win this for us and then we'll figure it out later. That's the idea, I think, with Rose Lavelle.
And my thoughts on Lavelle are that she operates when players and teams play a little more straight up, like a little more street ball. And that's what Brazil does. And Rose is so incredibly quick. Like, she gets in that stride, just gets that toe in, and you're like, how did she get there? And I think this is a game, like you said, that's made for her, because there's going to be moments in transition more in midfield that I think we've seen. Because Germany, although they tried to go forward, they were still very organized behind the ball with 2 holding mids. It was more of a 4-2-4 when they would attack, and those 2 would just sit. I do not see that happening with Brazil. And I think there will be moments where Lavelle, if she's operating properly and moving in that space, she's going to get more open space to operate in, which can just start a counterattack going forward.
Yeah, it can be huge. It can be massive. This game is huge. It is for the gold medal. It is an opportunity for the U.S. to get back on the podium at that stage for the first time in 12 years. Brazil has never won the gold medal. 2 silver medals. They have lost 04 and 08 Olympic finals. You will know that very well. And they are hoping for their first one, and it could be Marta's last ever game internationally. That alone is going to make this game, I think, feel really special. It's going to bring a lot of eyeballs from around the world onto this one. The U.S. is always in a microscope, under a microscope. There is always pressure. That is not new for these players, but this feels a little different, I think. And it's going to be cool to see who reacts and how people react to this moment.
It is going to be. And my friend Duda Paval, she'll be unhappy for me to say this, but I hope Brazil doesn't get a gold medal. I really don't, and she's not going to like it. But we need to keep it at that. The United States could use another one, and we don't need to share.
No.
That's how I feel. That's how I feel. And so now this is like the player coming out of me, I think. Not going to put words in your mouth, but I feel that way. And I do still have a lot of respect for Marta, and I'm really glad she gets this moment.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that she gets to play in this game and play for something so big. But obviously, I'm not pulling for that. United States definitely has to pull that one out.
I was reading somewhere, I can't remember, but this is a really cool moment. Of course, in general, it's great that Marta gets another game to get back from the suspension. But you go back to the speech about, like, the next generation needs to step up and take advantage and sort of grab the mantle. And you look at how young the group was against Spain because of the injuries, partially, and Marta's suspension. And I think no matter what happens, she's leaving this national team in a good place. We would not have said that 12 months ago. We definitely wouldn't have said that 18 months ago. Like, this was a team that in big tournaments, especially in the 2023 World Cup. They look disorganized. They look so reliant on her that no one else really wanted to go and win games. Formiga before that, of course, and how long that they were reliant on her. And that was what that speech was about. And now you go in and you beat Spain with 19, 20, 22-year-olds on the field, and you're going into a gold medal match on the backs of these players. I think that part to me is really great, and it's going to be exciting to see this game with Marta on the field because she is the ultimate audible coach, and you're going to sort of watch her interact with these players in this setting one last time.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. In the past, and I played with and against a lot of players on the Brazilian team: Rosana, Franciele, Atlani, Marta, of course. And you used to always say when you looked at Brazil, wow, they've got a lot of really good individual players. Like they're really talented.
Yeah.
All these things, but they didn't have the funding, they didn't have the investment into their program, and it's still not where it should be.
Right.
And what's really cool now, though, is that yes, they do play a risky system at times, but they are organized. They understand tactics. It's their tactics, and it pays homage to their culture and the way they like to play. So I think it's really come a long ways. And you're right. I think Marta can look back no matter what happens on Saturday and really think that it is in a good spot and be happy about the contribution she's made, not just from a wins and a goals perspective, but how she's paved the way for the Brazilian national team.
It's going to be an amazing event on Saturday. It's going to be one of the keynotes of the final weekend of the Olympics. That's what you wanted for this team. That's what you wanted for the sport. It is going to be a huge moment for NWSL as well. Brazil is one of the teams with a heavy group of NWSL players in their side, a heavy group up the spine. It is a large part of why they have been so successful in this competition. And of course, it is a huge part of this U.S. team. They are all going to come back with medals, because silver or gold, including Berger and Rausch and the players potentially on Germany or on Spain. Now that a lot of Spanish players have started to come to NWSL, that league is going to kick back off on August 23rd. But we had the semifinals of the NWSL Liga MX Feminal Summer Cup Series. If you'd like to add a 19th word on there as well, we can add that.
You did a great job, by the way. I was just holding my breath, but you were great at that.
Yeah, it's like I've been watching a lot of Olympics. It's like balance beam or vault or whatever, where it's like once you've started, just keep the momentum going,
exactly.
And then just try and stick the landing hard. They say fly high and stick your landings, and you'll have an opportunity to fight for a medal. Let's start with Gotham, who are going to have a chance in the final. The final coming up in October, but Gotham, 6 players with the U.S. women's national team. Berger with Germany, Ella Stevens out with an injury for this one, and they get a 1-0 win over Angel City. So Gotham finishes right now going to the final. They have not conceded in this competition. Jess Carter gets her first start, which is a big moment for this team, and I think you already see, okay, how does this player fit in? Because Gotham are so loaded for talent. Oh, she can play every position along the back line. So it's right back. It can be center back. It could be left back. And like, there will probably always be an opening at one of those positions for her to play. For Angel City, this felt really big for them in a different way. They are not a playoff team right now. We don't know if they'll be a playoff team. Contending for a trophy here felt like a big deal. It was a really good group stage. Christian Press comes back. There's so much positivity. It felt, though, even with Gotham's injuries to me, Casey, that there's still a gap. There is a gap between Angel City and the cream of the crop in the league. A lot of it is in possession and chance creation. It was a young group. It was fun to watch Fuller and Thompson sort of be able to carry some of the load, but in the end, not able to find a breakthrough in a game where they had more possession against this Gotham team.
And that's something that Angel City has been doing. They have their possession. They're generating a ton of corner kicks. And so sometimes, you need to just figure out how to put one of those away, especially if you're a team that, like you said, isn't in playoff contention. You're using the Summer Cup to get a little bit more fluidity, a little bit of confidence up, all those types of things. And they just weren't able to do that. But on the flip side, super impressive what Gotham is doing with the players missing. And defensively, a lot of times people think, oh, if you're just really solid defensively, you might give up a lot, but you're just really good in and around your box. Yes, they are good at that. But Juan Carlos Amaros makes no mistake about it. He wants to high press. He wants to put teams under pressure. And he has a very good structure and system in place for defensive work. And it works for them. It is risky at times, but they understand the spaces they need to protect. And they're like a well-oiled machine in that way, and just figure out how to get it done.
It was the move at halftime. They brought Zabroni on. They moved Yasmin Ryan out left. And within 3 minutes, I believe, Ryan finds the ball down the left wing, is able to have the pullback and create the goal. It's the only goal in the game, but it just showed the level of depth to this Gotham team again, that they're down all these players and yet they have game changing subs that they can make. And there's so much flexibility in this group. Ryan, I think, is a top level center midfielder when she plays in there. I think she's a game changing winger as well when she goes out there. Torres starts out there. She has some optionality about her game. Stengel started out there in the last game, starts at center forward in this game. There is a lot of movement that can happen, and it can happen with no subs or one sub. And that's one of the really nice things, I think, for this coaching staff, is they can sort of move the pieces around really quickly on the fly.
The build up to that goal highlights what Ryan can do. I personally like her in space a little bit more in the width, but do you see the first touch for the goal? I mean, out of the air, in stride, outside of the foot, it was perfect. That goal doesn't happen if she doesn't do that in stride. So it shows why she can play centrally as well, doing things in tight spaces, under pressure. And it was a great finish from Sheehan. But to have that tactical flexibility and just the personnel to be able to move in and out, that says right there that you have a very deep roster. And it's showing why they're being successful, even with so many players that are out currently.
It's... I could talk about what it looks like when everyone's there and healthy. It may never happen exactly. Like, that kind of feels like part of it, but it also probably doesn't have to with the way this talent is. And so this is a Gotham team that is going to remain in the conversation as one of the NWSL Cup contenders, potentially a Shield contender as well as we get started in the second half of the year. Guaranteed, though, at least one more final, because they've already played in the Commissioner's Cup earlier in the year for this group coming off last year's championship. They will face off against Kansas City in that final. Kansas City was the host for these two semifinal games. You were on the call for this one. Kansas City came out flying 120 miles per hour. Shawinga almost has one in the opening 90 seconds. They get an early goal as well. And then North Carolina found their feet and settled a little bit in this one before KC closed the door. Dabinia scoring against her former team. A little half celebration there. The initial reaction of, I scored a big goal too. Oh no, I can't celebrate. And I can't. What did you see from this KC team, and sort of how did you see this one play out?
It played out exactly how I think most people would suspect. You've got the possession-oriented team in North Carolina Courage, who can also be dangerous, and you've got Kansas City, who likes to be dangerous but can also possess. And so there's that little bit of back and forth with that. The first 10, 15 minutes, Kansas City looked like they were going to score 5 goals, and that North Carolina would never build out of it. And I think that speaks to the way North Carolina plays, though. They just didn't break more than the 1 goal. Obviously, they couldn't have been happy about that 2 minutes in. But they did start to build out even more in the second half. Ryan Williams was really good in the wide space. But when your right back is like your best attacker, like for the game, it's not great because you're not being overly dangerous. So Sullivan was really good on the ball. Narumi was really good on the ball. Sanchez had a few opportunities, but they couldn't quite figure out how to build up against the pressure of Kansas City. And that's what Kansas City's done so well. And when you've got Michelle Cooper, Dabinia, Shawinga up top, I mean, that is dangerous. It's like their own trident, trifecta. I don't know what we decided, but with
we've landed on trident, and we're not happy about it.
Well, that's what Julie and John are definitely saying, because I think that's what they requested or something, right?
It took them a while to get there. I think we said trident a week and a half ago. We were like, it's the best case out there, and it's not a great case.
Well, you're right. But
soccer-wise does it first.
We'll go with it. But Kansas City has that, and I tell you what, Dabinia coming into form for Kansas City is not good for the league because she hasn't been as impactful this year, and it could be for a variety of reasons, but 4 goals in the Summer Cup. She looks excited. She looks confident. That's just another weapon that they have in their attack.
There is a moment in the first half where she beats 3 different players as she comes from a deep right position into a central area, and it's just the curve on the through ball is not perfect for the run, where it's like, oh, so now you're going to add this to everything else. You've got the threat over the top. You've got the pressing ability. You've got the set piece danger. You've got the 1v1 ability already of a lot of these players in there. Now you're going to add like an MVP at her peak. And yeah, she looks extremely sharp. It changes as well. I think my opinion, we had this debate right before the break, which was going into the Orlando game with Bia out. Where do you play Shawinga? And I think myself and Jordan both landed on like keep her out left because she's good facing up. That she's already dangerous. Why are you going to risk changing her? But in bringing the way Dabinia is playing, you actually get Schwinga in similar areas like that because Dabinia can break defenders down and set her up. And you get her more involved more often because she can press and be involved from a central area. And it's just like another element for this team.
It all depends on the way you want to play and build up in the middle third. And last night, they played very narrow, Dabinia especially, but even Michelle Cooper would come inside at times. Yeah. So that allows Schwinga to push the center backs further back with penetrating runs on the diagonal, and that creates space. If you have players that want to come back that are more central forwards, and you need wingers that are going to penetrate in behind. So it's just that give and take with both. So I thought her playing centrally worked really well last night, just for the way that they were building up. But I tell you what, if Dabinia keeps playing like that, Bia coming back, Michelle Cooper can be dangerous in her own right. You've Labonta, DiBernardo, like all these players, Claire Hutton. It's like who's not going to be in the starting 11 in that front six? I don't know, and it just kind of will depend on kind of how they play together as they go down the stretch.
Last one here on this one, which I think for me was exciting, is Alana Cook getting the start, second straight start since the trade. They've also now made the move at goalkeeper as well. And that's going to be a conversation that I'm going to be fascinated by going forward of like, can you risk taking a player of the cultural status of French out of this group, even though it's a big name that you're bringing in? But at that center back spot, do you think it's Alana Cook's spot to lose now already?
I do. I think she just has a calm presence back there. I think it's a new start for her, whether needed, not needed, whatever. Right. But she just looks like seamlessly like she went in, just went about her job last night, just did her thing. Nothing spectacular that, the fan is going to go, oh my goodness, Alana Cook, did you see her? But that's good. I think that's good for a center back. Like if we're having to talk about a center back too much, right. You're either giving really good credit to the other team for making them play well defensively, or they're in a bad situation because they're around the ball too much and they're being noticed too much. So I like that from Alana Cook, that it was just go about your business, get it done, shut out. And I think that has to help her with her confidence as well.
A big move for this team. The defense is obviously where the weakness is for this group. They had a center back, they had a goalkeeper already in this window, and then a bunch of players coming back from injury. Casey looks to be at the same speed, which I think is exciting for a team that's like, we don't really want this summer break. We are playing our best soccer. The frustration with the loss to Orlando, different, but like I think if you're KC, you didn't want to lay off, and they continue to roll through the Summer Cup. They win the group. They're able to win in the semifinal. Now they will play in the final in October, which will be fascinating because it will be a potential NWSL Cup preview of like Gotham against KC. We didn't know how this would go. I think this is a pretty cool way for it to end, in that you get a super high leverage match coming up in October to always sort of point to as we try and figure out from a distance who is the best team, who are the favorites. You're going to get this little bit of a preview going forward in that moment. We didn't talk that much about Naomi Girma, by the way, as you went through the whole list of like, you shouldn't talk about center backs. I forgot about that. There's a million things we could talk about. That's because it is all really, really exciting what's going on. That's why we'll be back this weekend. We will be back to help recap your gold medal match. We will help talk about the future for the US, for Brazil, for a lot of teams, I think, coming out of this Olympics. This is the end of sort of one cycle, even though for the US, they're looking at it as a start of the next cycle. It's a really interesting time in the international calendar. And then from there on, we've got a lot of NWSL to cover for all of you. We're going to get Jordan back on as well. Casey, it's been awesome hanging out and talking soccer, and we will continue to do that as well going forward. It has been really, really fun. Thank you to all of you for out there listening and watching. Enjoy the game on Saturday as well. And if you are not, you can subscribe to our Patreon, jump in our Discord, and chat with us throughout the game there. We can all stress together, is my point. But until then, thank you for listening, everyone. No sleep, and we'll talk to you again very, very soon.